Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula is warning motorists who are driving with expired licenses past the grace period that they'll face fines and possible prosecution. It's among some of the announcements he made today. Of course, the country has been facing a major backlog when it comes to these license renewals, of course, exacerbated by the impact of COVID-19 and where we saw operations effectively in some sectors come to a complete standstill. For more on the story, we're joined by the South African Institute of Driving Instructors Managing Director Robert Chandler and the University of Johannesburg's Transport Department Senior Lecturer Dr. Joash Mageto. Dr. Mageto, good evening to you and thank you for your time. Let me begin with you. I think when it comes to these backlogs, the minister says no more extensions. Basically it ends at the end of March. Has there been a fair amount of time given to people to get their affairs in order?
Hello, good evening, and thank you for having me this evening. Now, when it comes to government policy, government usually will provide timelines, but in cases where maybe government sees that there is a possibility that people are not likely to comply because of the challenges that they are facing, especially when it comes to the inefficiencies in the various renewal centers, then maybe government may reconsider extending the time period. But then I want to believe that when it comes to sufficiency of time, I think government is in a better position to be able to pronounce itself on that.
Robert, let me come to you. As the Institute of Driving Instructors, what are some of the challenges that you have experienced on the ground that you find South Africans basically struggling with when it comes to some of these processes?
The COVID has made it a hell of a lot worse. But prior to that, we were already experiencing backlogs and delays due to infrastructure not keeping up with time, equipment, obviously the shortage of staff at the LTCs. So we've progressively had a build-up, which was just made 200% worse when COVID struck and we had the shutdowns. But in general as well, coming to that, we have had quite a few motorists that haven't quite been up to speed with getting out there and actually getting their transactions done for a variety of reasons, but it does happen. And yes, the biggest problem we're having at the moment, I think, is that there is an infrastructure problem. We've had the breakdown of the machine, which was taken out last year for 2 months, 2.5 months. And it was the only one that produces the cards. Thankfully, it's now back online. But I think, in general, we need to look at upping our infrastructure at the driving license testing center because there is just not enough staff and not enough equipment to service the public. That is why, from SAIDI's point of view, we've made submissions where we strongly ask for the driving license card to be extended to a 10-year period of validity, which the minister has recently said that he is actually going to look at in research. So we thank him for that. But I think if that gets done quickly, a lot of our problems will be solved. It will alleviate the backlog. We will be more in line with international practice. Got a lot of countries in Europe and that which move on to the 10-year. We've got France that has gone into the 15-year validity. So I would suggest that we move in that direction and we'd solve a lot of the problems that we are having currently on the ground. So it would alleviate the problems.
I want to talk about the challenges, Robert, that you're describing at the, the driving testing license centers. When it comes to the protests that we have seen over the last week, so the issues that are being raised, I mean, how long-standing would you say some of these problems have been from a systems point of view?
I think those problems are not inherent to the new system. They've just been compounded. by the new system, which is putting stricter parameters on applying. These problems have been historically there. They've been around for the last 10, 15 years. It's not something new. We've always had a problem. I recall in my days when I was a driving license testing center manager more than 15, 20 years ago, due to staffing problems and infrastructure problems, we had a 6-month waiting list before you could get a learner's test. Sometimes driving license tests in some parts of the country used to go up to 8 months. And it used to fluctuate there, but you always had these problems. They haven't been addressed. This technology has actually just pushed it tighter and tighter into a corner. And that's where we come from. We definitely need an overhaul of our driving license testing centers, the technology, the infrastructure, and the staffing to up the game to get it so that we can provide the service. I think what we're seeing in terms of the protests, and I don't want to go too much on with the protests because SAIDI is not part of that. We sympathize with what the guys are going through. We understand it. But this is actually a symptom of the real problem. We need to hammer the real problem and fix that. This bickering that we're seeing now is just a symptom of what's happening.
So, Dr. Mageto, here's part of the challenge, right? Technology is introduced to try and increase efficiencies, but also to ensure that the level and the scale of corruption that we have seen, particularly at, driving centers, is somewhat reduced. Do you get a sense that it has been efficient in handling these problems, because we still very much seem to have the human element of the problem, basically scuppering the efforts that would have needed to be changed by the introduction of technology?
Yeah, thank you very much. One thing that is that it should be clear is that yes, as much as we introduce technology to be able to create the efficiencies that we need and also eliminate maybe the element of brokers in the various driving test centers, is that the people who are working there should be willing to allow technology to work. Because having technology is one thing, but having people who are willing and to make use of that technology to be able to deliver their services to citizens is another thing. And that is where now government needs to come in strongly by maybe providing the training that is required to this particular personnel that are working there, and also providing the right technology that supports this, and above all, making sure that there is change management, whereby people will always resist change whenever it comes, and how now government manages this particular change is really critical in having this technology to work. Because the expectation is that technology is likely to reduce the queuing time that people are spending at these particular places, especially if you remove bookings from the offices, you remove the payments from the offices, you remove even some of the printing services that are taking place at these particular centers, then you are likely to create more time for the centers to perform those activities that cannot be done or be performed online.
Robert, in terms of reasonability, is it reasonable, the announcement that has been made by the Minister today, that no extensions beyond March?
I must be honest with you, I've always been against the extensions. I think we could have actually dealt with it differently. But the Minister has, I'm not objecting to the fact that he did it, I just personally feel it compounded the problem. We could have dealt with it in different formats, but that's the way they chose. But I just feel that we had too many extensions. So the end of March, more than enough time has been given for the people to comply, more than enough extensions. I don't see a demand for extensions being justified.
Let's leave it there for tonight. Robert Chandler is with the South African Institute of Driving Instructors, and Dr. Joash Mageto is with the University of Johannesburg.